I recently found this video on YouTube of a debate between Andrew Wilson and another woman, I forget her name, on the Münchhausen Trilemma. And all throughout the debate, it was just cracking me up so much. And I really shouldn't be laughing, you know. But what was funny about it is seeing how confident everyone was in their conclusions, but not able to ground their view of the world and their view of the truth in anything at all, except basically preference. As far as demeanor goes in the debate, I thought that Andrew Wilson had a much better one than the lady did. And it's really, when you see debates between conservatives and liberals like this, you often see this. To me, the conservative is often much more willing to talk, willing to be taught, willing to listen. And the liberal is always, seems to me, very snarky, rude, using 2 to 3 times more words than is necessary to communicate the same thought, being very impatient, and just very often just being very mean and condescending. But really, that wasn't my takeaway from the debate. The takeaway from the debate is something that I really shouldn't exult over or laugh about. It just exhibits the hopelessness of the world and being stuck in their circularity, with really not able to ground their conclusions in anything which is outside of the world but is in the world. And this is the problem with philosophy from the beginning. Philosophy from the beginning with the Ionians, began on the assumption that God is not in the world. If we're talking about God, God is not in the world. He's not an immanent appearance. And so, since he's not in the world as any kind of immanent appearance that is proven and demonstrable, we can only struggle toward him. We can only use our autonomous powers of reason and what was called an affection for truth, without really defining what truth was, in order to reach him. And that's fine for the Greeks, I guess, but it's not fine for Christians. Because during this time when the Greeks were doing all of this, there already was building a revelation of God in the world that would remain and become his point of informational contact forever. And it's a point of contact that breaks the circularity that we're going to see here. And at the end of the video, I'll explain why. So let's look at some of the major parts of this debate. Now, before we react to this debate, we need a precise definition here. The Münchhausen or Agrippa Trilemma says every attempt to justify ultimate truth ends in one of 3 places. Infinite regress, where every claim requires another claim endlessly. Circularity, where a claim ultimately depends on itself. Or dogmatism, where you simply stop and say, this is given. Now, this isn't just a philosophical puzzle anymore. It's become the modern world's baseline assumption about knowledge. The unspoken axiom is that these 3 options exhaust reality. You have to pick one. But notice what that presupposes here. It assumes there is no transcendent yet historically present artifact that could mediate truth publicly. It assumes ultimate grounding must come from concepts, logical systems, or human flourishing conditions. In other words, the trilemma is treated as an unbreakable horizon because the possibility of a mediating phenomenon is ruled out before discussion even begins. So what you're about to see in this debate isn't two sides escaping the trilemma. It's two sides operating inside it, accusing each other of the very regress they share.
The argument for me to impose Christian nationalism.
Let me ask that to you. What's your argument for it?
So when you're talking about Agrippa's trilemma, would you have any criticisms for this argument that you're making?
I can't solve it. That's the point of the dilemma.
Okay, so when you say that when I ask you, is Agrippa's trilemma true?
I can't solve it.
Is it true though?
Is a trolley problem true? Is Euthyphro's dilemma true? What are we doing right now?
Yeah, I think philosophically you can say that the conclusion is true or false.
No. The Agrippa's trilemma isn't a conclusion. Agrippa's trilemma is a problem. It's a philosophical problem. Is Euthyphro's dilemma true?
Wait. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about Agrippa's trilemma.
Yeah, it's a problem in the same way that Euthyphro's dilemma is.
Okay, so
is trolley problems true?
Walk me through Agrippa's dilemma. I'll make sure I understand it.
Okay, Agrippa's trilemma posits that no beliefs are justifiable foundationally because...
Now notice how quickly the conversation shifts from grounding truth to arguing about the definition of dilemma. This is not trivial. Once grounding is restricted to conceptual systems, discussion then becomes linguistic management rather than epistemic discovery. Instead of asking whether there is an objective mediator for truth, they argue about what counts as a philosophical problem. That's already evidence of the trilemma's cultural power. It's treated not just as a diagnosis, but as an unquestioned framework. The cage isn't examined, only the bars are debated.
Squirrel brain. Can you tell me...
I'm pretty focused.
Can you tell
Laser-focused,
me how it is then that you can create any justifications that anybody's ever doing anything wrong?
Logic and reason. You build on top of like tautological axioms that seem reasonable based on kind of assumptions, but they seem reasonable, and you build upon an entire structure of world belief, which is what
none of them are justified?
At a foundational level, no. All beliefs are unjustifiable.
Well, then you don't...
How do you solve dogmatism?
When you just told me then that I can't go to secular people and tell them that their beliefs are unjustified.
You can't and be consistent.
So then we should just throw philosophy out.
No.
Why not? It's not justified. At a foundational level, it's just a tautology that we make up,
because
right?
people accept tautologies, because that's how you think about the world, right?
Okay.
Like math, we just accept tautologies in math. We have to, because you have no starting point if you don't. So we assume these things, and then we build on top of them. And then the beauty of things like math and science, in the case of like, science realism, is you can use math and these things to observe and test and see if you're actually mapping onto the correctness of the world.
I see.
Yeah.
So then if
inductive and deductive
if I utilize the assumption that God is real,
that's dogmatism. Yeah.
Yeah, this would satisfy you because you also use the assumption that God is real.
I'll just grant it, of course.
Okay.
I always grant
if that's the case, and we assume that God's real, and then we assume God's commands, and then we build our case off of that.
They say all foundations are assumed, but there are two meanings of assume. Assume as unavoidable axiom, and assume as arbitrary preference. And those aren't the same. Yet the debate repeatedly collapses them. When someone says, you assume God, it's framed as arbitrary. When someone says, we all assume foundations, it's framed as unavoidable. That equivocation becomes the engine of dispute. And once foundations are treated as internal stipulations rather than responses to something objectively given, no transcendent grounding remains. All that's left are systems optimizing themselves. Systems can produce coherence, but coherence is not ultimacy.
Assume God doesn't care.
I would question your Christian theology.
Oh, well, why? I just assumed it.
Scripture. Do you think that like logic, reason, evidence, scripture doesn't exist outside of like foundations?
It doesn't matter. What matters is what I assume.
How would scripture not matter when I'm talking to fellow Christians?
Because I just assume things.
Well, no, you don't just assume things.
Why not?
Oh, you're equivocating again. So what
How
you're
am I
doing,
equivocating?
because you're saying assuming at a foundational. So when I say assume, I mean at a foundational axiomatic level.
Yeah.
That is not the same thing
My
as
axiom
assuming.
is that I'm always right
That's
about
not an
everything.
axiom.
Why can't it be an axiom?
Because it's not tautological.
I'm right because I'm right. That's a tautology.
Yeah. Now now I can go, I don't think that's justified. And then I would prove you wrong.
Okay, but who cares? You just said nothing's justified.
Sorry, are we just doing like nihilism warp tour? Nobody should care. Nobody should care about, you granted me that even at Christianity, you granted me that your worldview is just as unimportant. So how do you make people care?
Because that makes my point, actually.
So
If it is
you're
the
hands
case-
off. You're like, none of it matters. My system is just as
if it is
unjustifiable
the
and assumed
case,
as
now I
everyone else's.
at least understand what you're saying. So great. If it's the case,
Took
if it's
2
the
hours
case-
and 15 minutes.
Let him get
yeah,
through
if
it.
it's the case that we're just assuming the worldview at a foundational level, and it's an axiom I'm right because I'm right, now we have a tautology, then there's actually no good reason for me not to assume that I'm just right about reforming liberalism after my own image.
So reason can be, it includes things like inductive and deductive logic. This is the stuff that we build off of our axioms, right?
Can.
Well, that's what we do. That's what.
Now, this is where the conservative realist position tries to halt regress by positing God. But if God functions only as a logical terminus, a conceptual stop sign, then within the trilemma's logic, that is dogmatism. Not because God isn't real, but because he is being introduced as a concept rather than a publicly mediating reality. If God is present only as an axiom inside reasoning, then he's absorbed into immanence. The debate unintentionally shows that a merely conceptual God cannot escape the trilemma.
What would make them different?
My use of inductive and deductive logic is better. I use better reason. I have more evidence for my
better,
claims.
hang on. What does better mean here?
Better means like more coherent, more consistent, like
Yeah, but
logical
why is
things
that
we
better?
value. Because it seems to produce better thinking. It seems to work
That's a
alongside.
tautology.
Yes,
It's better because
everything.
it's better.
Yeah, tautologies.
Yeah.
Welcome to philosophy.
Yeah, so
Andrew.
then I just want to make sure. So you're just going to endlessly be in a case of infinite regress and tautology,
Sweet of you. I appreciate that.
and then there's no moral facts, or just assume.
Just let me pour my energy drink that
Okay.
Brian respectfully, and then we'll get back into you really struggling with philosophy.
Oh, I'm having a struggle. That's true.
You are.
This has been very difficult for me. I agree.
I mean, hey, you've at least accepted the reality that your beliefs are just as unjustified as everyone else that you mock, which is great.
So might makes right.
No.
Yeah, it does. Yes. Why wouldn't it?
Because of things like coercive power versus legitimate authority.
Who cares about that? You're just assuming it.
No. So
Yep.
again,
After it's at
pragmatically,
its foundation,
do you think
whatever
that-
arguments you have
do you think
are
like all of this
assumed.
around me just doesn't exist because I'm assuming it?
Wait. Material things?
Yeah.
Is philosophy material?
Yeah, it can be.
How?
Pragmatism is often.
How?
Pragmatism?
Yeah, how's
it's
it
often
material?
interested in like material effects.
That's not material.
So-
You're just saying what it's.
I'm
Now the liberal alternative. Coherence, flourishing, what seems reasonable, what produces better outcomes. But these are optimization criteria, not grounds. They regulate systems, they don't found them. So when conservatives say liberals ground morality in self, and liberals say conservatives ground morality in unjustified axioms, both criticisms land. Both are operating within the same hidden assumption. There is no transcendent mediator publicly available to anchor knowledge. Once that assumption is granted, regress is inevitable. So here's the critical move. Both sides are regressive, not because ultimate grounding is impossible, but because both have accepted the trilemma's hidden premise, that no transcendent yet immanent artifact exists to mediate ultimacy. Everything must either be conceptual, logical, sociological, or psychological. All of these are immanent. So accusations fly, but no escape occurs. Now consider another possibility. What if there exists something historically public, not generated by the subject, not reducible to a conceptual axiom, yet bearing transcendent origin? That wouldn't eliminate interpretation. It wouldn't compel assent like mathematics. And Joseph Butler was right. Evidence leaves room for moral response. Scientific data requires interpretation. Historical events require interpretation. Even axioms require interpretation. The question isn't whether interpretation exists. The question is what we are interpreting. If all we interpret are our own concepts or flourishing conditions, we remain immanent. But if we interpret a public historical phenomenon that precedes us and confronts us, we have an epistemic mediator. That's where messianic historical revelation enters. Not doctrine as system, not private experience, fulfilled oracular word embedded in history, claiming transcendent authorship, yet appearing within ordinary reality. That kind of artifact doesn't magically dissolve regress. It reframes it. Grounding shifts from conceptual termination to recognition of a phenomenon not authored by us. It's not scientifically coercive, not deductively overpowering, but it becomes rationally weighty enough when paired with a genuine love for truth, no matter where it takes us. Not love for coherence, not love for self-affirmation, not a love to win an argument, but love for truth itself, even when it costs something. So the trilemma isn't false, but it is incomplete. It diagnoses the limits of purely inferential systems, but it excludes the possibility of an epistemic mediator, something historically present yet bearing transcendent origin. Because that category is excluded, debates like the one we watched never resolve. Realism and liberalism accuse each other of regress while sharing the same immanent assumption that ultimate grounding must remain inside conceptual systems, moral intuitions, or human flourishing conditions. And this problem turns inward towards Christianity as well, and most importantly, because much of the post-John Christian enterprise has quietly accepted the same framework. Scripture has often been treated primarily as a collection of doctrinal propositions rather than, first, as a historically demonstrative disclosure of fulfilled oracular word claiming transcendent origin. Once that shift occurs, Christianity steps directly into the trilemma. Authority rests either on future doctrinal arguments or further doctrinal arguments, producing regress, on circular appeals to inspiration, producing circularity, or on institutional stipulation, producing dogmatism. The church then argues exactly as the world argues, asserting axioms, defending coherence, appealing to outcomes, while verbally affirming transcendence, but epistemically operating within immanence. Now, at this point, a common objection appears. Isn't appealing to fulfilled messianic prophecy just another circular assumption? And the answer is no, unless one already assumes it is merely a naive religious preference. What we are dealing with are historical documents making testable claims about prior predictive texts and subsequent events. That is not fundamentally different in epistemic structure from how we treat other ancient historical sources. I don't assume Tacitus's account of historical events like that of the Peloponnesian Wars or anything else as mere preference I examine manuscripts, corroboration, internal coherence, external attestation, and historical plausibility. The documents themselves bear evidential weight. Likewise, with messianic prophecy, the claim is that identifiable texts precede identifiable historical events in ways that are not plausibly explained by coincidence, fabrication, or retrospective invention. One may dispute the conclusion, but the process is historical evaluation, not circular doctrinal assertion. The accusation of circularity usually arises only when one has already categorized the material as religious preference rather than historical testimony. And this matters ultimately because the choice of ground is not merely intellectual. It reveals the orientation of the heart toward truth itself. The line of messianic historical evidence, fulfilled prophetic word in history, uniquely attracts the person who genuinely loves truth not merely as conceptual correctness, not as social flourishing, not as psychological comfort, but as something ultimate, something allowed to occupy the region where reason itself says ultimacy must reside, the transcendent. Someone who truly loves truth for its own sake is careful not to confine it to the spatio-temporal autonomy of human reasoning or culture. They allow truth its own territory. And once you allow that, you begin honestly scanning the field of competing claims, religious, philosophical, scientific, asking whether any publicly accessible phenomenon actually mediates transcendence rather than merely theorizing about it. If that search is conducted with integrity, not merely curiosity but willingness to follow where it leads, you arrive at a singular historical claim. Messianic prophecy fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth is where it is. That claim does not overpower the will like geometry. It still requires interpretation, humility, and moral openness. And Joseph Butler long ago was right that evidence leaves room for moral response. But that is precisely why it functions as a genuine test of love for truth, rather than a mere intellectual assent. And that is why ultimately how one responds to this line of evidence determines one's standing before God. It reveals whether one loves truth as transcendent reality or only as immanent utility. Those satisfied with conceptual systems, institutional belonging, or pragmatic outcomes remain comfortably inside the trilemma, often without realizing it. But those who allow truth to extend beyond the immanent horizon begin to look for a mediator. Something historical, yet not merely human in origin. And that search, if honest, converges on the fulfilled messianic witness. So the real issue is not which horn of the trilemma you choose. It's whether you permit truth to exist where reason itself says ultimacy must be, and whether you love it enough to follow it there when it appears historically among us.